I was asked to put together a talk for a company for a Leadership Innovation Day about my journey with data. And so I've done that, and I've tried to make it even more accessible to people, because I think it's an interesting way of showing about what I've done and what I'm doing now that involves data. So this is all about data systems, and also a bit about the kind of mission that I have to make better housing in the UK. So the first thing to mention is that this is a little bit complicated, and so along the bottom throughout I've got this progress bar, but as you can see here, it's gonna split out and become non-linear for the work that I'm doing right now. But I hope you'll see about how these threads come together to all support the same central mission. Anyway, so right at the beginning, so we're going back to my childhood, which is a very, very strange thing to be talking about, but that's where we need to start, I'm afraid. So I was brought up in rural Herefordshire, and Herefordshire, for those that don't know, is one of the least densely populated counties in the UK. So it's very, very sparsely populated. So there's people live in the town of Hereford, and then nearly nobody lives everywhere else. So for example, for sixth form, I had to take 2 buses that took 1.5 hours each way in order to get to college, because there is only one state sixth form college in the county. That's how serious things are. And similarly, even the primary school was on a different time schedule, because there was only one bus driver, and he had to do one of the high school runs as well. I had 6 kids in each year. So in my year there were 5 other children. So you're talking really, really small community. Everybody knows everybody else's grandparents, because everybody's lived in this community forever. And I was one of the smart kids. There were quite a few smart kids. You've got quite a lot of time. There's not many other things to do other than to read books and do farming. So there's the community here was such that I ended up being one of the smart kids. Went to the sixth form, which like about half the kids would do, and there's 1,000 people in each year at the sixth form. And I was very fortunate. I had 2 fantastic maths teachers. So you can imagine, actually, at that scale, you've then got half a dozen maths teachers, and you're able to put on a further maths class. And my maths teacher actually taught herself how to answer the entrance exams for Cambridge, so that she could teach me how to do it, which was absolutely fantastic. Really went above and beyond in order to do that. From my primary school and from my high school, nobody had ever gone to Cambridge or Oxford before, and that's, as you'll see, that's where I ended up going. So I think what was interesting for me, and perhaps the most impactful part of that, is not that I was the first one from high school or primary school to go to Oxford or Cambridge, but that the year after me, someone else went, and the year after that, someone else went from my high school. And that had never happened before, and part of being that first person sort of forging the path meant that then the idea of going to Oxford and Cambridge became something that was within the possible. And that's awesome. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I got up to at university. So I read maths at university, as I've said, and it was really hard. It was really, really hard. So I'd gone from being like one of the smart kids in Herefordshire to being one of the middling kids at university. And for me, maths is about understanding the world. And I think that people that have studied maths in depth will understand that and appreciate that, because this is, but those that haven't perhaps might not, but this is about how we can use numbers and structures in order to understand what is. It's quite a deep philosophical thing. In the 17th century, a lot of mathematicians were also philosophers, because this is so fundamental to the nature of being. I rode a lot while I was at university, absolutely loved it, but it took a lot from me in terms of time and effort, and so I had to stop that before I failed my degree, which I didn't. I did absolutely fine, got my 2:1, and then moved on. But I think there was a real, obviously university is often a formative time, and it was very, very formative for me. I'd been moved up a year as part of the early bits, because my school of 6 people in each year couldn't quite cope with giving me the material, and they were small enough that they had the flexibility to be able to chuck me into the high school, where of course the headmaster was the husband of the primary school teacher who was yeah, anyway. So yeah, left there, was very, very happy at Cambridge. It was a fantastic experience, made some lifelong friends for sure. And then I went to London. So I went to King's College London, and I did theoretical physics. Now, this image is what Midjourney thinks of being a visualization of an M brain. I think it's actually nice, it's very pretty. So the bit of mathematics that I went into was very much the applied end of mathematics, and within that I was very interested in general relativity, and it's about using maths to understand the world. And so I got pretty good at general relativity, and then the thing that was cool at the time was string theory, and this is sort of part of what the Large Hadron Collider CERN is about probing some of these fundamental aspects of the universe, so that we can understand what actually is going on. Why is there anything, for example, and why are there these patterns that we see between, for example, electromagnetism and gravity, and about how we can unify forces together. So the mathematics here is absolutely beautiful. I just can't tell you about how pleasing it is to work with such levels of symmetry. It's glorious. But I wanted to do more that was in the real world, so I was feeling myself being dragged into the ivory tower, and that wasn't really where I wanted my life to go. So I applied for graduate schemes and ended up at Tesco, the retailer, because they had a technology leadership graduate scheme. And part of the attraction there was that I'd be able to go and see lots of different parts of the business, which they absolutely did, and I had a really good time there too. So there's 3 bits of Tesco that I would like to talk to you about. So the first bit is SharePoint, the second bit is about pre-season non-food forecasting, and the third bit is about supply chain for food. So I worked in lots of other departments as well, and spent my time in shops, and this was all very, very useful experience about learning about how data is actually used on the ground. So the SharePoint, so I was a product owner for SharePoint. Now, if you've ever used SharePoint, so this is part of a cloud transformation program, and it meant the sort of problem statement was twofold really. So one was that we had shared drives that people were storing things on, and this was not what we wanted to be doing. It was not very collaborative. We had single points of failure and so on. So we wanted to centralize the data. And the second point was about encouraging collaboration, because we had a fish buyer in Thailand that wasn't communicating anything about best practice with a fish buyer in the UK. So we wanted to bring those kind of patterns together. And when you think about it, this SharePoint stuff sounds like it's just a Microsoft tooling, but actually this is about enterprise data architecture. So really, even though I didn't appreciate that at the time when I was writing, working with a development team in Bangalore, trying to get this code working, and working with Microsoft to develop new ways of surfacing information between different teams. It really is about data, and at that time it was very much more about qualitative data. It was about data about processes. It wasn't about having data warehouses. It was about how we're managing those internal documents that we have. The next project that I worked on was pre-season forecasting. So this one was about non-food. So there was a big, so it was a £10 million implementation of a non-food forecasting system, and I was involved there actually as a mathematician. So I was part of the internal team that was making sure the external experts were delivering correctly on the optimization routines that we were building. And so as I saw what was happening there, I saw a bit of an opportunity around the pre-season. So this is for products where you don't have a sales history. So an example might be if you've got a new type of iPhone coming out or whatever you want, you need to be able to make an initial commitment to a purchase in order to have that product on the shelf for customers. And you don't want to buy too many, but you don't want to not have enough either. So you're making that initial guess, and that can be quite important, because if you're left with a lot of stock, as we were actually left with quite a lot of stock of mugs, you're ending up paying to hold that stock in your warehouses. But also if you run out, as we ran out of a purple iPod when Lady Gaga tweeted about that, that's the sort of age that this was at. When you run out, that can be really expensive in terms of lost sales, and then you get very upset category managers who wanted to be able to sell more of them. So I saw an opportunity there to use data about products that we'd sold before in order to match them together. So I tried some very simple ways of doing that, and they turned out to be all right, but I thought we might be able to leverage parts of the product hierarchy in order to take a better guess at which products were similar, because we could then use the sales history of those similar products to look at how many we might expect to sell of this new product. And that, so I used a machine learning approach for that, because it was needed, actually, because we had a bit of expert judgment in there, but we wanted to be able to suggest an initial quantity that was a sensible order quantity, and then they could change that. So it was more about suggesting it and then tell us about why the algorithm might not be working, or why it might not be the number that you wanted it to be. And when we did this without using machine learning, it came up with a number that wasn't as good as the number that we ended up coming up with. In terms of on other product launches, the number that we suggested it matched. So of course at Tesco you have vast amounts of data. So you might remember Clive Humby. So he set up dunnhumby, which is part of it's really what runs the club card side of the Tesco operation. And he said data is the new oil, and that's sort of part of what's built into Tesco. So data is really, really important. Even though the organisation has been around for quite a long time, data has been central for perhaps the last 30 years at Tesco. So we have all this historical data that we could use to compare approaches on, and we would hold out various samples of data, so then we could use that for testing purposes. And that was very innovative. So it was a very slick team. We were able to go quite quickly, pilot things quite quickly. We were writing our own code. It was very, very dynamic, in part because we didn't have some of the baggage of existing systems to work with them. And then when we, then I went over, after a bit of a break, I went over to supply chain, and that's more about, so it solves some of the same problems, but it's about predicting things that have much higher sales volume. So like your bananas, your apples, your cereal, all of it predicts everything, but it's particularly these high volumes. So where you have high volumes of transactions, you have much more data to work with, and that means that you can adapt your algorithm much more quickly. And it also means it's a much more operational algorithm. So data here is part of the day-to-day running. This is how everything runs, is data. You can't run a big query on the data warehouse, because this is going to just grind everything to a halt. So you've got different operational constraints. And I think what I wanted to describe or articulate to you is, even within this one organization, you had these very, very different cultures around data. So different ways of delivering with data, different ways of interacting with data, almost different philosophies about data within the same organization. So that's across SharePoint, this non-food forecasting and the food forecasting, let's call it. So that was fantastic, and I really liked working in retail because of this central nature of data to it, and about how my deep mathematical skills, the stuff that I didn't realise would be useful about string theory, that then come round and actually this way of reasoning about problems becomes very, very useful. So then I was poached by Ocado. So Ocado's a very different business to Tesco. So I worked for Ocado Technology, which is a technology firm. Ocado makes robotic warehouses. It is set up to be a digital firm. Yes, it happens to have a retailer, and that's useful for dog fooding. So this is just like testing your own stuff, and it's a retailer in its own right. But it was also at the time doing Waitrose, Marks and Spencer's type deliveries as well. And there, we didn't have the same constraints around like your data warehouse, because we built a streaming architecture, so data was streamed instead of being stored in this particular way, and that meant that Ocado had a fully different culture. It was like agile software development first. So I've been running some of the teams at Tesco in this more agile way of working, which means very people-centered, thinking about the customer first. And not entering into really large programs of work when you could chunk up and get value much quicker. And so Ocado absolutely run like that. So it's much shorter deliveries. You wouldn't go out and build a whole geospatial routing system. You say, okay, let's build a thin slice of a geospatial routing system and then build on the features as we get there. So I had my development teams out with the drivers, so I was looking after part of this last mile. That's how I started, was looking after last mile, which is all of the bits associated with the last section of delivery from the warehouse to the customer's door. And this, like people that were involved in building the delivery and routing systems would go out with the delivery drivers, and they would sit next to them and ask them about how they were finding using this stuff. And then that allowed us to make changes to, for example, the user interface, or to how they can choose what order the different drops are in. And really that way of working is very much more embedded at Ocado than it was at Tesco, and the cultures are totally different in that sort of regard as well. And the interaction with data then is very, very different. So around software delivery, everything has data over the top. Later on in my career at Ocado, I was sitting as part of the HR team, because we were using data so centrally in what we were doing that we were able to, that it needed to be part of this sort of people capability. So how we were managing people was very much through data. How we were choosing to hire was very much through data, and we were looking very actively at things that we could do to promote EDI, so that we could get really diverse teams, which we know have better outcomes. And we were using data to do that. So this wasn't just about having these great stories and about demonstrating it through, but it was about making sure we were making the structural changes informed by data to improve the outcomes that the business wanted. Okay, so then I went off consulting, and I did lots of different consulting jobs. So I was essentially almost selling myself around this data-driven decisions in an agile software development way. So I want to tell you about 4 of the different projects that I worked on across different companies over a number of years. So the first one I'd like to tell you about is about shipping. So you can see in the background here, there's a ship, a container ship was the kind of thing that I was working on. So I was working in Reykjavik in Iceland and doing optimization of ships. So this was about reducing carbon associated with shipping. So it costs a lot of carbon, ships use a lot of fuel, and by having sensors and by measuring and tracking these things, we can suggest interventions to the pilots of the ship in order to make sure that they're reducing the carbon as much as possible. So for example, we showed that most of the carbon was within the harbour. so when you're doing the manoeuvring, it uses quite a lot of carbon. But of course, if you're adjusting your longer trajectory of your voyage in accordance with some of the weather and the currents, then you can reduce it. But it takes a long time to slow down a shipping container. So you need to make them aware earlier on about what is going to be happening with the conditions, so that then they can get the speed right in order to be behaving correctly later on in the journey. So that's one use of data. So you might not think about shipping as being like a data-centric thing, and it primarily is about the assets, but there's also this layer on top that's about the data that's associated with how you move from A to B. Another one was a surgical knife. So this is a different company, highly regulated space, and what we were building was a knife that as you cut through tissue, it burns it. And from the chemical signature, you can tell whether you're cutting through cancerous tissue or healthy tissue. And this, in an agile delivery sense, is very, very challenging because of the regulatory requirements around medical devices. So that for me was a very interesting one, where we've got this very, very technical data-driven solution that's about the chemistry and about science, and then you've got this regulatory requirement over the top. But it's actually about data. So nearly every regulatory requirement is about data, about showing what you've done and knowing that you've done what you've done and being able to demonstrate that you've done what you've said you've done. So really it's about having data systems in place and governance in place, which is a data system, in order to ensure that you do the right thing. One that was perhaps less positive for me in terms of what I was actually delivering was around gambling. So I worked for a gambling firm in Krakow in Poland, and it was very much about, so I was looking after many teams, including data science teams, and so it was more about the addiction funnel, to be honest. So about making sure that people didn't go too far into having financial difficulties, but also that they were not dropping off from the system and that they were remaining engaged with the game. And for me, this was a really formative experience in terms of making sure that what I was doing was what I wanted to be doing, what I wanted to be investing my time and my life on, really. So yeah, so I left that contract early because I wasn't finding it in line with my values, to be honest. And the final one here is around defence. So there's a missile there, and this is an interesting one from an ethical standpoint. So I'm very much in the camp that we do need defence, and so I work in defence, and this was much more about cybersecurity. And again, data is a huge part of that, and has a big role to play, particularly actually in the AI world that we now live in. The cyber aspects and the much more enhanced phishing techniques that we're seeing are really, really relevant. But again, these defense contractors, they also are interested in delivering value quicker. They want this sort of agile way of thinking, this data-driven way of thinking about how we deliver. So it was great to be a part in that as well. So I then, having done all this contracting, I decided that I wanted to build my research capability. So I'd had lots of different kinds of exposure to different projects. I delivered value in lots of different organisations, and I thought, this is cool. I can spend my time doing this forever. But I'd like to be able to continue doing this sort of thing with a research lens, so that I feel like I'm contributing to knowledge and contributing to a bigger, so that I get even better at doing what I'm doing, was sort of where it was coming from, so that I know that I'm doing a good job of these things, and that I can measure that and prove it. Sort of, I wanted to do some research, and a PhD is a great way to learn how to do research. And I decided to do a PhD in AI. So this was back in 2018. So this is pre-COVID. ChatGPT hasn't come out, and so There's natural language processing is a thing. So is computer vision. So we're getting some of the earlier sort of autonomous cars, that sort of thing. And I did my PhD in neural network architectures and artificial neural networks. So not people's brains, but the idea that computers can sort of simulate some of the way that brains work. And I absolutely loved it. It was great, really formative experience. Obviously, we had COVID in there at the same time, and I had a family as well, so there was a lot of additional complexity. But what my PhD ended up being about was about diagrammatic representations of neural network architectures, and this PhDs always go down a very, very specific rabbit hole. And I ended up in this one because it was about communicating about complexity. So as a PhD student, you find your own way through, and this is the topic that I ended up doing after I'd written a few papers, and this is what emerged out of it. And very much as I was doing the work, I realised that a lot of my career had been spent in communicating about complex issues using data. So as a manager at Tesco, you're having to communicate with directors, etc., that didn't understand data but wanted to get some of the insights. So I was very much data storytelling, and I was doing that throughout my consultancy career, whether it was at director level or below, whatever I was doing, it was absolutely about using data and about communicating about that complexity. So I can tell you some of the cool things that I found in my PhD. Like, so for example. I think probably the thing that I found most interesting was how different people were communicating about this technology in different ways, but they were often doing it visually. So they were drawing this out. So we had 12 interviewees who were all experts doing active research in this. We had 18 different diagramming tools being used, 18 different ones, right? So that gives you an idea of the spread of how the kind of tooling that people were using in order to reason about these complex things that they were doing. So that's just my one little highlight. But there's a whole thesis to read if you're interested. So obviously this was at University of Manchester, and I'm living in Manchester. So this is one of the cradles of the Industrial Revolution, and it's where Engels came, and he was writing about the condition of the working classes because of the level of squalor there was, and how awful and smoky and dirty the conditions were. And around the same time in 1833, the Manchester Statistical Society was founded. So I, of course, had joined this society before I came up to Manchester because I was looking for some new friends to do things with, and I found this august society that had 2 Nobel Prize-winning presidents. It'd been around for nearly 200 years, and they were debating these social, political, and economic issues. And so they were founded during, like, you know, several of the founding members were anti-Corn Law League people, so this is really important social issues in Manchester at the time. They were involved in making secular education happen, because until then it was very much like religious-based education. And I was just really inspired, and by the ordinary meetings that the society put on, I had my eyes open to the social, political, and economic issues facing the Northwest. You know, and even just running around the streets of Greater Manchester, you go through some of the most deprived regions in the UK, statistically, and so I felt like I wanted to do something about that, and we'll see about how that goes in a second. So that's kind of like where I was. That's the journey up to the point where we are sort of nowish, or where things start to change. So at this point, I'm seeing data as a superpower to solve wicked problems, right? So I've seen how good data can be in retail, how powerful it can be for outcompeting the competition and delivering great customer value. And I've also got this theme which is sort of emerging in me about wanting to do something that's to do with social justice and making things better for people. So what we'll see is these 4 strands coming out, and these strands are going to be related to a sense of social purpose, and I hope you'll see that coming through. So the Statistical Society of Manchester doesn't look the same as it did in 1833. I was elected as president in May 2025, and we're doing a lot now. We're doing a lot. We have an AI working group because AI is about use of data, and our charitable purpose is about debate, data, and dissemination concerning social, political, and economic issues. And so we're starting a bit more around data storytelling. We've commissioned research around electoral mapping, which is particularly relevant in Manchester. And we're starting some outreach with local schools in terms of financial literacy. So we've got lots going on, and we've benefited from a couple of very generous bequests. So we've got some financial backing behind us in order to deliver even more social impact. So that's one strand. So that takes a huge chunk of my time, and because I've served on council there for about 10 years now. This is an example of one of my research projects. So after my PhD, I didn't stop doing research because I was trying to build my research capability. So I do research, and I do research on things that I think are interesting. And one of the things that I think is interesting, again, sort of mapping back to that 1830s Manchester, is thinking about the Industrial Revolution. So as in the Second Industrial Revolution, steam engines and all that sort of good stuff. And so I was looking back at that period of time, trying to work out, is there something that we can learn from this period in time where we saw a huge amount of reasoning about technology and about social disruption, and about how we can maybe learn something from that in order to project it into today's data-driven AI complex system that we've got going on. And so I went down to Bristol, where they have the archives of Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Isambard Kingdom Brunel, British engineer, did loads of stuff, Great Western Railway, a couple of steamships, like many railway stations, huge tunnels, Paddington Station, lots and lots of stuff. So I was interested. So they preserved his diagrams, and this made it his sketchbooks. These are many folios. They've got a whole archive full of these. And very, very generously, the SS Great Britain Trust gave me 2 days with their archivists to conduct research into Brunel's diagramming. And so this is 3 pages of different sketchbooks, and you can see here how Brunel is using drawing as a way to reason about these engineering problems. And he's got a bit of a mix of 2D and 3D going on here. There's some measurements that are happening on this squared paper that he's using. And you've got these series of different drawings of cranes as he's trying to work out exactly where to position the pulley in order to make this structure work. And I found that really interesting. I mean, it was a great privilege to see all of these drawings, and you can see the differences, the different types of pen that he's using in order to sort of mark some of these things. He's using pencil where he's not sure. He's using black ink. He's using a reddish ink, and he's trying to work out how these objects that potentially could exist in physical space but don't yet, how they might work. And I can see a lot of parallels between what was happening during the Industrial Revolution and what's happening now in terms of us reasoning about systems. It's just that our systems associated with AI are more of our business processes, actually, or our human processes, rather than being instantiated in physical space. Anyway, so that's an example of one of my research projects, and I'm doing various bits, including associated with some of the stuff that you'll see later on. So I'm also a director at an engineering firm. So this was one of my clients from back when I was doing my consulting. We got on really well, and so I said, they wanted a bit more of my time, and I said, you can have more of my time, but I want in. I want to be a director. I want to be a partner in the business. And they said yes, which was fantastic. And so I go in. You know, I'm thinking data driven. This is going to be super. And all of our stuff is on a dodgy bit of tin. It's some out of commission SharePoint, not even SharePoint, right? This is an out of commission box that really should have been switched off a long time ago. We've got a server in the corner. Oh dear, it's all a little bit ropey. What about multi-factor authentication? Got any of that? No? Okay. Right, so we're laying the foundations. And so I spent a couple of years doing a cloud transformation in order to get, so we had a global team, we have a global team, and in order to get good access to that, because we had people remoting onto a server in our office in Manchester from India and from Poland, and it wasn't performing well. So we did this cloud transformation in order to get people better access to data. Again, this is about data, but it's the boring stuff. It's the laying the foundations right. And that was about also bringing together some of our systems to get the technology and the data in the same place. But also, so it wasn't just about the IT stuff. It was about the data about the business. So if you'd asked us back then, so about 3-4 years ago now, if you'd asked us, how many beams have you calculated this year? How many structural beams? We wouldn't have known. How much profit did we make last year? Well, we would know it only last year. We wouldn't know it for like last month. What lost sales have we got? No, couldn't possibly ask that. How many customers are we going to have next month? No idea. Absolutely no idea. So I came in and had to lay some of these business scaling foundations. This isn't just about technology. This is about people, process, systems, finance, everything. One-to-ones weren't happening. Everything needed to be put in place. All of it underpinned by data. Okay, and this took years. This took a couple of years to get to a point where I'm not happy with where we are yet, but to get us to a point where things are significantly more stable, and we're able to use some of the data tooling that we need to. So now we're a bit better. So we've laid the foundations, and now what we've done is we've automated the hell out of it. So we've automated almost everything that we can automate sensibly. So all of our invoicing, etc. This is all automatic. Customers can now get quotes automatically from us when previously that would have to be manually done. Our competitors, some of them are still working on paper. So we're like way ahead in terms of the level of automation that we have. Internally, we're also able to automatically categorize different support tickets. So when someone phones up, now an automatic transcription comes in, so we know exactly what conversation has been had, and previously that would have had to have been dug out from the system in some way. We're using retrieval augmented generation, so we've got our repository of our policies and how we conduct our engineering, and that is then queried in order to provide recommendations to engineers. We're vibe coding a lot, so we've got some internal proof of concepts which are essentially built by engineers that don't know how to code, but they do a first pass, and then we give it to a proper software engineer to make sure that it is robust in a technical sense, as well as doing the actual engineering that the engineer wants it to do. Our personal development, that is also informed by all of the data that we have around how our work is. So I have a lot of one-to-ones every week, and those one-to-ones, I record them with consent, of course, and I use that for the minuting of it to capture all the actions. But then I'm also using that, essentially a chat GPT thing, in order to get feedback on my own one-to-one performance. How did I do? How did I support that person? What could I do better next time to support them? And so I want to iterate, or to get across this idea that it's every interaction that we're having, we're getting data now in this business in order to improve our own processes. And what we're finding with the Gen AI revolution that's going on at the moment, the main value is in us being able to get this accelerated feedback loops. It's very, very interesting being like on the front line of a small business where we can really work very, very quickly to deliver things, because new releases of the software, which are happening every week or so at the time that I'm recording this in June 25, it's like every week or so there's new technology coming out, and we're needing to test that right away to see whether that solves some of our harder problems that the current tooling didn't solve before. We've sponsored a PhD in computer science and engineering in order to solve one of our hardest problems. So we can't solve this problem. So it's to do with where you place the beams in a structure that's being altered. We can't really solve this problem. We don't really want to solve it with Gen AI tools. That's not what we think should happen, because there's so much subjective things that are going on there as well. And this is a very technical task. And we have a huge corpus because we've done more than 12,000 jobs now. So 12,000 projects where we have previous designs, future designs, and where the structural alteration needed to happen. So we've commissioned a PhD in order to work that out. So it's a bit of a computer vision problem, and machine learning on top of that. So yeah, very, very interesting. And that sort of links to my own PhD in terms of I'm now supervising a PhD in order to do this. And it's part of the long-term thing that we have going with the University of Manchester. So we're also, with their business school, we have students in every summer. So we have a team of students, and they'll come and help us with some business problem. And that's great for us because we get fresh ideas. It also doesn't cost us very much. And it's great for them because they get to experience what it's like inside a small business. And what I would say as well is that we need this research capability to be part of what we're doing as a business, because in order for us to remain relevant, we need to innovate. If you look at Facebook, if you look at Google, they all have research teams, huge research teams, because they're trying to stay relevant and to apply that research to the future. And we're not, our business isn't just going to sort of sit passively by and sort of consume tooling. We are innovating in order to deliver our own value for which we will own the IP, and that's part of why it's strategically relevant for us. And this is about helping people have better homes. So this is people that want to do a loft conversion or an extension, or if they're building a new home, we are helping to make that as effortless as possible. So this really is about the customer and about helping people to have better homes, bearing in mind the housing crisis in the UK, which I'm sure whatever stage you are watching this video, it is still going to be a housing crisis, because it is not a simple thing to fix. So the housing crisis, right? So social housing is it's for people that can't afford market rent. There's a huge waiting list for social housing. More people want it than can get it. And social housing providers, so there's thousands of them in the UK, and they don't compete. They don't compete with one another, except occasionally for plots of land. But they're collaborating in some ways in order to provide good service for tenants and good value. But then they're perhaps not collaborating fully. And there are definitely big challenges for the sector in terms of culture, data integrity, skills, financial constraints, political change, managing different levels of scale. You've got some providers that will manage 50 homes and some that manage more than 100,000 homes, and everything in between. There's challenges with regulation and changing regulatory landscapes. So the sector's under a lot of pressure, and there's been recent tragedies that have really underscored how important it is to get this sector right. So this for me is a really important part of what I'm doing. So now for me in social housing, the right thing to do isn't for me to go and get my hands in and get really dirty with this. I'm doing much more of a bird's eye view. So I serve on the board of a housing association in Manchester, got 12,000 homes, and are on a digital journey, I would say. The regulatory landscape is very interesting, and in terms of the role that the regulator for social housing plays in influencing how these organisations behave, it's very closely coupled. And it's sort of a bit of a co-regulatory environment in terms of the relationship of the board with the regulator. And so that's really interesting because there's levers that government have through the regulator in order to deliver change within the sector. And what I've been doing, in addition to serving on the board of a provider, is doing AI advisory and helping them to create strategies around this. So whether that's a part of their their IT strategy or not, I don't mind, but it's about how AI can help serve their business mission and get them better value for customers at the end of the day. I've been doing coaching of IT directors and IT managers, because often the IT functions or even ICT functions are really sort of seen as almost just keeping the lights on, right? They're the back office guys just doing stuff. It's not like a software function or something like that. So helping to build some of the capability and the awareness in the leadership of IT to allow them and give them that kind of empowerment to be able to step beyond what their role used to be and what actually their role is now, because the Gen AI has really urgently reshaped how IT directors need to operate with their teams. And it's very high level what I'm doing in terms of, like, it's not in the detail. It's very much a cultural, very much political advocacy type thing. It's very inter-organizational. So there's lots of organizations. So on any given day, I might talk to perhaps 10 different providers. So that just gives you an idea about how varied this landscape is. And there's some shared challenges and there's some unique challenges, and it depends on all kinds of things, like what kind of housing stock that you had before, and your financial situation right now, and the culture, and where the organization came from. So it's very interesting in terms of how then that shapes how they use or don't use data to make decisions. And probably arguably the most important thing I'm doing here is system change advocacy. So I'm doing my best to get it so that then data becomes much more central to how the sector operates. So there's lots of reports like the Better Social Housing Review, which talk about how important it is to get the data right, and about how bad data has caused problems in the past. But I think we need to give a little bit more scaffolding to help them to build up around that, which is why I support the UK housing data standards. I think this could be a really important building block for uncoupling from IT providers in the sector that are very like legacy, and they've got a bit of a stranglehold on the sector, but also then for unlocking some of the opportunities around collaborating around building machine learning solutions, so you can get some of the economy of scale advantages around data science by doing some shared data. That's the kind of world that I'm imagining. And in the short term, I've set up this Housing AI Leadership and Implementation Exchange. So this is housingai.org, and this is bringing together a community to actually go and use AI and use that to make things better for tenants and better for customers. So I'm really excited about that, and about the possibility of bringing all these really great people together that really know about the customer and helping to give them the tools that they need to be able to do that even better with the latest technology, and to do that safely within the regulatory environment and ethically and so on, all that good stuff. But I think shaping, so this sort of system level shaping is what I'm spending a lot of energy on. And hopefully you can kind of see how that sort of fits in. So we've got these different strands all sort of swirling together. It's all about data. The social mission of the Statistical Society. We've got then the social housing coming together. This is all about data. And then we've got my engineering firm where we're using data to help make better homes. So this is all fitting together, and they're all different maturity levels, all kind of coming together and coalescing around this analytical capability and building beyond what was possible before, because some of these machine learning solutions allow you to do things that were not possible. Some of the exception handling that you can now do, the identification of needles in haystacks, has become much easier. The problems that we thought we couldn't solve, we can now solve, and that's really exciting. That's why it's a really great place to be. But I wanted to conclude this by telling you a little bit about what I've learned. So some of my top takeaways. So if you've skipped to this bit, you're cheating. But right, so as simple as possible, but no simpler. So this is an Einstein attributed quote, but I think this is really important. You don't want to just be implementing some machine learning solution, guys. Don't do that. As simple as possible. If a linear model will do it, do that. It's more explainable. It's a better solution. Only use machine learning or something more complicated if you must, because that's what's needed for the customer. So then we've got these three key points. Obsess about the customer. Everything has to be about the value you're delivering for the customer. Everything, all of the data that you're doing, anything you're collecting has to be about delivering value for the customer. Don't just collect all the data, collect the right data. Fix data at source. So in social housing, this is a really big problem in terms of dirty data. Then we do a data cleanse in order to fix it, rather than fixing the systems that are generating the data that is data that you're not trying to capture because you've got a bad system. So fixing data at source and investing in fixing data at source, I think, is an absolutely key learning. It's much easier to tidy it up at the beginning, and then you get the benefit of that all the way through, including in your analytics function. And the third point is this is a data revolution. So this, whether it's about Gen AI or not, I'm not that bothered. The point is that businesses that are running on data are now running the world. If you look at our biggest energy supplier in Britain, this is Octopus Energy. This is a tech firm. Most energy transactions are running through a tech firm rather than running through a traditional energy provider. There's a revolution going on. You need to understand there's a data revolution going on and position yourself and your business in accordance with that. And however you're understanding the customer, however you're delivering value in your organization, data is your superpower. Whether it is the data that you've internalized and you've created your own mental model about how to do procurement, that is data. You have internalized data, and you could be more explicit about that perhaps. But data is your superpower. So go and use it. Go and use data. Thank you very much.